Hello, my name is Riley Holt, and I'll be reading from my paper, The Myth of Capitalist Mobility and the American Dream in Lucy. In this paper, I will explore the way Jamaica Kincaid engages with the myth of the American dream in a cultural moment that is driven by transnational late stage capitalism and the overarching colonial discourse in the novel Lucy from 1990. As explored in recent post colonial scholarship, female agency and mobility are directly tied to Western capitalism, a significant and prominent myth that is perpetuated by the culture of late stage capitalism is the American dream. The experience of coming to North America is oftentimes one that is framed as being liberating, when in reality, many will never move beyond their current situation. True capitalist agency for the third world woman has been and remains to be a myth created by those who are looking to profit on an economically vulnerable subculture of people. This dilemma takes center stage in Kincaid's reframing and reimagining of the American dream in her novel Lucy. In the story of a Caribbean woman coming to North America, we see how immigrants are sentenced to the reality of a lack of mobility more so than the white wealthy women that surround them. My paper will show how Kincaid's novel ties the constructed myth of the American dream to the unmistakable capitalist operations at work. The main character, Lucy, views coming to North America as an escape from her small island of Antigua, but in reality, she has just signed herself away to a life of tiring economic climbing. While Lucy rightfully feels resentment and disdain for the position of au pair that has been placed upon her, she is forced into accepting her place in the social order. Lucy must move past the position that has been imposed upon herself and other immigrant women in order to acquire financial independence and thus gain mobility and agency. By presenting Lucy's dilemma in this manner, Kincaid offers insight into the reality of transnational capitalism spreading not only poverty but false hope to women seeking a better way of life than the one that these systems have already devoured at their home. This further dramatizes the material and psychological damage that can open doors to feelings of empathy and sympathetic imagination. The experience of coming to North America is oftentimes one that is framed as being liberating. This is due to the romanticizing of the American dream through popular media, as well as the liberating feeling of agency that often exists alongside mobility. All Lucy has ever been told about North America is drenched in optimism and false reality. Oftentimes, for immigrant women, this is attached to a false sense of agency. As Lucy is being driven to her home, she reflects on past daydreams she would have about these very places. She says, all of these places were points of happiness to me. All of these places were lifeboats to my small, drowning soul, for I would imagine myself entering and leaving them. Her hope of going to North America is closely linked to her dream of mobility due to the post colonial myth that once you swap your native lifestyle for a Western one, you will be closer to happiness and fulfillment. Everything after this moment has a feeling of anticlimax. This hope of mobility got her through so much, and now the lack thereof has brought on a feeling of worthlessness and failure. In the article Disposable Women and Other Myths of Global Capitalism by Melissa W. Wright, we see an exploration into the trials and tribulations of women immigrating from neocolonial places. Wright asked early on, how does worth grow from worthlessness? A question Lucy tries to answer by moving to North America. Once Lucy has arrived, she has the distinct feeling that it is all wrong, that everything she has done to gain freedom has resulted in discomfort and feeling misunderstood. The idealistic North American lifestyle that has been sold to her does not line up with reality. There is a language barrier. She sees value in sharing personal thoughts and feelings, and they speak money. She is aiming to learn this way of life from them in order to gain the most clear form of mobility, economic stability. In order to survive in the toxic and stressful environment, Lucy disassociates from her reality by drawing on the past in the article Poor Visitor Mobility as a Voice in Jamaica Kincaid's Lucy by Jennifer J. Nichols. She states, As the story progresses, Lucy experiences several free association moments in which a word or encounter recalls a brief vignette from her life in Antigua. The correlations begin to appear between the restrictions placed on her in Antigua and the new limitations imposed on her in the US. There are many different examples of Lucy using this deference. One of the most clear examples is this of this is when the family has taken a trip to the Great Lakes. Anytime Lucy is near water, she tends to reflect on the past and how far away it is, both geographically and in a metaphorical sense, as she spends time on and near the lake, both alone and with Mariah and others. She thinks about where she comes from. Lucy grows tired of conforming to what is expected of her. She becomes more vocal, and above all, she gains more agency. A major breaking point in exercising her voice is when Mariah tells her about her Indian blood. When she mentions this to Lucy, Mariah expresses that she might take this the wrong way. This sends Lucy into a thought spiral in which she dives into her grandmother's heritage. She thinks about the Carib Indians and how Mariah would have seen them in her fancy museums. All of this builds to her asking the question, how do you get to be that way? She views this as a triumph, seeing that she has asked this question to herself many times. She knows that there will likely be no change to come from this, but she will let it move her forward. There is also a possibility of it causing Mariah to question her position in a world designed for her. This is one of a few moments up to this point that she has taken control of her situation. Being an au pair is not what she wants to do, but it is her way out, her means to an end. You can view these moments of her expressing herself as an alternative sort of motion, allowing herself to detach from her situation. It takes asking questions such as this for there to be a change in answer and attitude. Nichols writes, her mobility makes this reworking of power positions possible, meaning it is required for her to make others around her feel uncomfortable every now and then. I have found through my readings that discomfort is inevitable when breaking down harmful systems in a capitalist discourse. The way that others see Lucy in North America has everything to do with where she comes from and what she looks like. This, it is where she comes from that has landed her in the home of Mariah and Lewis. This is because in order for her to move to North America, she must fulfill a capitalist need that is presented by Mariah and Lewis. They need cheap childcare. She wants a way out of Antigua. It is a business proposition. Mariah views Lucy as a person to pity, someone who has more than just capital to gain from her presence in her life. Lewis says, poor visitor, over and over in a sympathetic tone. The name visitor continues to follow her, serving as a sort of second name, an identity, a second identity that creates a double consciousness. As she progresses, she finds it in herself to boldly express how their remarks make her feel. You can see this when Mariah tells Lucy about the flowers that she cannot wait for her to see. For Lucy, this takes her back to her education in Antigua, where she was forced to memorize poetry from the Western canon. One of the poems was about the very flowers that Mariah tells her about. This causes Lucy to have feelings of anger due to the fact that when she was forced to recite the poems, she never expected she would have the opportunity to literally live them. When they finally go to the garden, all of these feelings manifest in Lucy at once. Kincaid writes, I did not know what these flowers were, and it was and it was a mystery to me why I wanted to kill them. Just like that, I wanted to kill them. I wished that I had an enormous scythe. I would just walk down the path, dragging it alongside me, and I would cut these flowers down at the place where they emerged from the ground. Not only does she resent them, she wants them gone completely, taking away her pain and the enjoyment they serve the privilege of one swift moment in one swift moment. She goes on to say, it wasn't her fault. It wasn't my fault. But nothing could change the fact that where she saw beautiful flowers, I saw sorrow and bitterness. Lucy tries to tell Mariah this, but she is incapable of understanding. While this is frustrating for Mariah, she will not lose sleep over it like Lucy will. She sees her as disposable, as a pretty and unique thing to keep in her house. She is nearly as romanticized and commodified as the beautiful flowers. To put it simply, she is nothing but industrial waste, discounted third world labor employed to do a job that is fill that if she fails will be filled by someone much like her. She needs her nannying job, but she does not feel tied down to it. The way that the family sees her makes it easier for her to want to keep moving on. It encourages the mobility that she craves. In finding this drive in herself, there is a possibility of worth being born from worthlessness. Lucy begins gaining agency through the most seemingly simple form of mobility, moving on. She deals with the drama of living with Mariah and Lewis for as long as she can, but before the year is up, she knows that she must keep going. She has developed both a skill and passion for photography that has allowed her to feel joy. When Lucy tells Mariah she is moving out, her reaction is cold and filled with anger. Lucy sees Mariah as a woman who is incapable of understanding her path in life, while Mariah sees Lucy as a dear friend. Mariah lives in a world where nearly everything can be purchased, but she cannot secure Lucy in her life through these capitalist means. While money is not necessary for Lucy to move on, real Western mobility is money. Thus, Mariah cannot understand why Lucy no longer needs her. The lack of empathy in is a result of the masculine power structures that capitalism creates. At the end of her article, Right states, the third world woman's path of destruction also leads the way to the capitalist development that heralds modern progress. And again, in this respect, we see how the tale repeats a popular mythic theme that suffering and sacrifice, particularly on the part of the woman, are often required to move society in its proper direction. In trying to keep women like Lucy out of the Western economic equation, it is furthering the toxic system that created this very oppression. Lucy is refusing to be a tool of the capitalist system and instead is putting everything on the line to be able to live in the way she desires. All of these obstacles and prejudices come together to ask the question, can agency exist for the immigrant women in the West? I believe that women like Lucy, who come to the West in pursuit of the American dream, have been fooled by the image created by transnational global capitalism. It feels like a trap that has been designed in order to bring in a new workforce of hopeful third world women, only to replace that hope with heavy worthlessness. The worthlessness that acts as an anchor, holding them to a position that they had no interest of filling. Worth can be born here, but only when late stage capitalism is a thing of the past. The American dream is to have nothing and turn it into something. Economic mobility derives from strategic political strategy, not passion. Her journey is noble, but the mythos surrounding women like her does not create an optimistic perspective in her getting there. Lucy is supposed to be who the American dream was made for, but I propose that the once pure American dream is now dead. I suspect that the dream has now been replaced by a ladder symbolizing success that is often missing steps for most who aim to climb it. These steps being access to education, healthcare, jobs that pay a living wage, and the pure joy of living. Not everyone can reach the top no matter how much they sacrifice. It is a system that inherently benefits the entitled and the extremely lucky. Women like Lucy can gain some sort of mobility and agency, but it could leave them unfulfilled. All of these elements of critique that make Lucy a novel that encourages commentary on US domestic policy, culture, even or perhaps especially as it considers these phenomenon as a transnational context. The true capitalist agency for the third world woman has been and remains to be a myth created by those who are looking to profit on an economically vulnerable subculture of people. It is this truth that has pigeonholed these women into filling the roles of caretaker, laborer, and maids. Lucy hates her job, but through that employment, she gains the little mobility she has to change her career towards her passion. She moves past that position of caretaker, but in the grand scheme of things, no woman deriving from the third world will be free to pursue their American dream until there is immigration and economic reform. Until then, mobility will be a treacherous and tiring climb to a fabled Western paradise. Thank you.